afternoon, and I want to thank Rita as President for inviting me to speak, and I'm greatly honoured to be here. I don't think I've addressed 500. I did one day in Europe a little recently at a big event, but since I was in Theatre L in UCD, as a very young lecturer, where we used to have 500 students doing the H-dip as it was then. So I'm very honoured to be here, and I hope I won't disappoint you in what I have to say. I suppose I come, in a sense, from the outside politically, because I'm not a party political person, but I do believe that academics have to remain detached from power. The power of trade unions, the power of government, the power of business, the power of all vested interests. I think we are artists of the intellect who bring our detachment and our views through our research to the table as something different. So what I have to say today is based on research which I did some years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, and published in a book on new managerialism in education, co-authored with Dimna Devine and Bernie Grummel, which is based on a study in primary, secondary and higher education, mainly with school principals. And subsequently, I have also just completed a major study of higher education involving 10 higher education institutions. So I want to talk about mainly the wider context of education and the wider socio-political context in which it happens. This is briefly what I will talk about. I will talk about recognising our achievements very briefly. Then I will progress to actually examining issues of neoliberalism, and also how averages, rates of success, which are very important, can conceal backstories and our own political carelessness. In particular, I'm going to focus on the concept of equality of condition, because there is a lot written about equality of opportunity, and one of my main arguments will be you cannot have equality of opportunity without equality of economic condition. I will explain that when I come to it. Mainly because the most recent research internationally is showing that it isn't just what happens in schools, it's what's happening out of schools in the private market that is dictating huge class, disability, and ethnic minority and racial inequalities in education. This is a major shift internationally. And as always, they don't always follow with the policies, but they do the research. The United States has been a leader in documenting that, and I will explain it. So I'm talking as well then, relatedly, about the threat of neoliberal capitalism. You may love it, you may hate it, it doesn't matter. It's the dominant ideology of our time. And it has huge implications, not just for children in school and for teachers, but also for the ethos of our schools and our public institutions. And so I will argue that it is a threat to care as a fundamental value in education. Educare in Latin is to nurture. It is not educare, to lead, and it is to nurture. So I want to discuss that and why care and ethic of care should be a priority value in education. So very briefly, without boring you, because they have been documented, I do think it's very important to own what we achieve. Education is one of our better functioning public services. And it is to the credit of teachers, parents, and all the people who've gone before us, including many religious, let me say, who worked for no money, particularly women, who were, women religious, who never had a pension, no freedom, and who educated us, as did others, often for very little pay. I know they were often in control, but I think it is important that we honour the VECs and how they maintained public education and prioritised it from 1930 onwards. So we have had a history of contested but successful education. And for example, 50% of our 30 to 34-year-olds have third-level qualification, the fourth highest in the EU. Our early school leaving rate is exemplary, and that is to the credit of the people, who worked on the programme to prevent early school leaving. But we also have a very significant number of what are called NEETs, young people, 19-year-olds, who are neither in education or training. It remains at 15%, which is very high. So we've very poorly developed apprenticeship system, as we know. It's not resourced, it's not planned. But having said that, there is a big move now, and I do want to just put out a signal there on 2 points on this. One is about further education. Yes, it's very important. But I happen to be very familiar with Germany. I was invited there a number of times to speak, and I'm going there again in the autumn. But remember, the apprenticeship system in Germany, first of all, it is a completely different manufacturing sector, which is secure, long-term and predictable, not like our construction industry, which is a lot of people think of when they think of further education. And it also doesn't have a very clear exit route into higher education. So if we're going to go the route, I would be all in favour of further education and apprenticeship when I see the professional middle classes sending their own children on those programmes. You know, what I feel is very important, that we don't, say this is fine for somebody else, but not for my children. So yes, we do it, but it must always be a route to somewhere else. So what I'm saying, I suppose, is beware of the wisdom of the privileged insider. That's what I'm saying. I think my button here it is, privilege. What I wanted to mention here, because it's only a little over 50 years ago, since the experts in education in 1960 said, as I quote there, that all secondary education for all would be financially impractical and educationally unsound. In fact, when you read the report, as I did, in detail, you will see what they actually said, which was that the majority of people were not intelligent enough to benefit from second-level education. And anyone who knows my work knows my first job was in educational testing in the research centre, and there is no such thing as innate intelligence. It's all to do with opportunity, investment, and people putting the resources into you. So what I'm saying, in 1995, I brought our gardener from Harvard here, and I think he had a very significant impact, but maybe we have forgotten what he said. And that is what I have just said, their Harvard Zero project, which showed that very clearly. So I want to say here, just to go on, because I'm just conscious of my time, I'm supposed to be only speak for 20 minutes. In the last 20 years, without saying it, because in Ireland there is a strong anti-intellectualism. When you use a word, even like neoliberalism, people say, oh, don't be using big words. But that has led us to a place where we have no debate. We have no intellectual debate. And I think that is a serious, serious problem. And while I'm on the subject, because I write a lot about the theory of ideology, I've just published a journal article on it in European Journal of Social Theory. Everybody has an ideology. Whether you're in Sinn Féin, Labour, Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, Solidarity, you name it, you have an ideology. There is no view from nowhere. Everybody has a position. And I think it's very important that we recognise that intellectually, and we debate it intellectually. But I want to remember as well how divided at the extremes our society has become. In market income terms, that's before social welfare and taxation, we remain the most economically unequal country in the OECD. And you are, if I may say so, because I am part of it, the professional middle classes. So sometimes those of us who have secure and permanent jobs, particularly if we have a partner who's permanent and secure, we don't see the poverty of others because we don't live it. And 60% of full-time employed have an income of less than 37,000 at the moment. 20% of the full-time employed earn less than 24,000. That is an enormous number of people. 20% of our children are at risk of poverty. How can you concentrate in school if you're at risk of poverty? And this is what I'm asking when we talk about equality in education. You cannot take education out of the economic system of our society. And that is a major, major thing. And I just decided, because the European Monitor published these figures lately, 1 in 10 Irish people spend 60% of their income on rent, and 1 in 20 spends even more than that. So I'm just saying there are huge issues here. And what I want to say is we have a super rich. And Professor Schreck is very head of the Max Planck Institute in Germany, very well known, has written extensively about the rise of what we call the new oligarchic elite. The people who are not politically stateless, but who are morally stateless. They control an awful lot of investment, they control global capital, and they decide who and where and when people will get money in terms of investment. I think we need to own up to that, and people sometimes blame our politicians, but it's no use blaming politicians when the power lies in market capitalism. I'm not exonerating people or saying they're not responsible, but I think we need to have a conversation that actually admits where power lies. So what I'm saying here is wealth and income inequalities have become the most significant factors in actually undermining the public good that's creating equality within schools. Yes, I know Emer Smith and colleagues in the SRI show you that schools do make a difference internally. They're hugely significant. But in terms of educational credentials, as I say there, are competitively acquired positional goods, and those who are best resourced are advantaged in getting them. That's it. And the most recent research in the United States controlled for quality of schooling, quality of teacher input, etc. Even with that, it found by far and increasingly, especially since the 1980s, parental's private income is the major determinant of class inequality and racial inequality in education. And that is something that makes us feel very uncomfortable because, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, income is a zero-sum game. Some people have it and some people don't have it. So what I'm saying here is they found that upper middle class parents in the private market spend 7 times more per annum per child than the lowest income group. That is in the private market. Extracurricular activities, what we would call grinds, and I will come to that. The Irish League of Credit Unions, for example, last autumn, showed that parents are spending, on average in Ireland, $999 per child in primary and $1,379 at the beginning of secondary school. Of course, not all parents are paying that, but we know that the actual back-to-school allowance is about €150 and 200 and something per second. So I'm saying people cannot compete on those terms. So what I want to come to, I suppose, is the myth, in a sense, because you may have seen these figures before. I'm sure you have, because they're from the SRI data. And what they show very clearly is class inequality in the Leaving Cert attainment. And I'm not saying that's entirely your fault, because I think that is where there's a mistake made internally. And Richard Leite from the SRI says this as well. Schools are relatively egalitarian institutions internally. But what people can do, and we see here, the blue represents the people who get the largest proportion of high grades, 4 Cs and higher level paper, the higher professional classes, then the lower professional classes, then farmers, because they're always an outlier because they're not so singular, then we go down the social class scale. It shows you that money actually makes a difference. And I think the mistake we make is we think, oh, it's all the fault of the Leaving Cert. It's the fault of the point system. Sorry, it isn't. It isn't. And when you have a society and when education is the nexus on which class privilege hinges, people compete and they buy resources on the private market. That's what it is. We know it, I don't want to bore you with more statistics, but just to say the role of private capital in Ireland. The most recent study from, for example, the Living in Ireland, Growing Up in Ireland survey shows that a 1% increase in income at age 13 has a 6.5% increase in verbal scores and a 5.2% increase in numerical scores. That, to me, tells it all. Because what is happening, of course, and I regret this, but I think this is the way our society has gone, and I think it's important to look at it. Economically unequal societies at the polarised extreme, it brings fear. The fear starts to drive politics. It produces status anxiety, or what Wilkinson and Pickett call evaluative threats. Everybody fears their child is going to lose out. I lived in Denmark and other countries, and we see they don't have the same degree. They don't, because if you fail at that level or don't do well, there are loads of alternative routes. And we have very few alternative routes for those who don't succeed at leaving cert level. Youth Reach is there, back to educational allowances, a lot of the cuts that were made to that during the crisis. So we have a problem here. And what I'm saying is, and I think is very serious as well, when you have intense competition, it actually produces fear and anxiety for the future, and it delegitimizes care. Why would you care for others? And in my summary and my abstract for today's paper, I said Ireland in many ways is a society with a warm private hand and a cold public heart. People are kind, decent people to their neighbours, to their friends, to their family. But the stranger, the other, is the outsider. Why would I pay my taxes? Because they might go to somebody else. What do you mean? Everybody pays taxes. The lowest 10% of income earners pay in indirect taxes the very same proportion of their income, because they all live in Ireland, their majority are on welfare-related payments, as the richest 10%. But we have created this idea that we can have a democracy and a funded educational system with no taxation. That is absurd. It is just not realistic. And I think what has happened in education and elsewhere is an aggressive individualism has developed, endorsed by neoliberalism, but it's dressed up as ambition and entrepreneurialism. And encourages individuals to be highly competitive, be it in relation to jobs, material wealth, etc. And you have the development of the actuarial self, where everybody counts. Will I do it, and will it be a point in my CV? I mean, good heavens, if we reduce education, if we reduce our work life to a calculation of what would be in our vested interest, what hope have we for creating a caring and inclusive society? I think that is a serious issue. I don't know if you've seen this table, but if you haven't, it's well worth studying. Wilkinson and Pickett's work on the spirit level. I won't go into it in detail because of time, but at the bottom of the graph here on the right-hand side, you have high income inequality, and on the left it goes up from low child welfare up to the best child welfare. The top countries with the lowest income inequality and the best child welfare are, not surprising, in Europe, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, the Netherlands, etc. We are in the middle, near Canada, below Canada, near just around where Greece is. And although you have a very wealthy country in the United States, child well-being is very low. And the same even in the UK, it has gone down, because the UK has produced a polarised society, and Australia. So we have the Anglophone countries have in fact pursued very strong neoliberal strategies. Northern European has resisted it. Of course there has been contestation of their social democratic or quasi-socialist project, but they have resisted. And child welfare and well-being is much better in those countries. I think that's my point, that's very important. So I want to say that why economic addition? What I'm trying to say is we need to target the right issue. If we have fiscal policy, if we have an economic policy, if we have a tax policy, which doesn't ensure that everybody can participate equally, you will have inequality in education. It follows as night follows day. And I want to mention it here because there was a lot of talk about subjects. Let me give you three actually, but I'll mention two. Music. 50% of music has to be done outside school. It's an oral performance-related assessment. Yes, there are wonderful teachers who manage to teach their children in groups and teach them individually in schools. The vast majority of children who do extremely well in music pay for it in the private market. It costs about 25 to 30 euros for half an hour. On average, you would spend €1,000 per year. It greatly advantages you because, of course, you will be guaranteed to get much higher points than somebody who doesn't. So we have a subject which is effectively dependent on the private market to perform at the highest level. The Minister mentioned Gaeilge. Wonderful. I was delighted to see that 40% was going to be given for oral Irish. But where are you going to learn it if nobody in your family speaks it? Are you going to go to the Gaeltacht? Last year, it cost €950 to go for 3 weeks in Coláiste na Bhíon. So, the point I'm making here is because there is a lot of talk about having we have it already. We have a system whereby if you're not in a household where you have the proficiency or in a Gaelic school or the opportunity, you are dependent on that system and you can't do as well as others. Yes, again, I note there are wonderful teachers who break through that and who manage high-level grades, etc. for their children. But that is not the norm. And the middle classes can afford to go to the Gaeltacht and the working classes who have low incomes and other and low incomes cannot, and that's the truth. We also have mathematics. I looked the other day and I decided to do a quick assessment. It is probably the subject in which there's most grinds. So we have a massive commercial market in mathematics. So what I say is, if we are going to introduce into education modes of assessment which are out of school based or based on out of school resources and material, remember you will exacerbate social class, racial and ethnic inequality. So now, I better hurry on because I think I've only about 5 minutes. What I'm saying here is neoliberalism prioritises, is a threat to public education. I don't know where I was now. Sorry, here. It is a theory of political and economic. What it is, people said to me, will you ever define it, Kathleen, if you put it up on the screen? So I'm defining it as I put it up on the screen. It's a theory of political practice based on the following beliefs. Human well-being can be advanced by liberating individual entrepreneurial freedoms and skills, strong private property rights, free markets and free trade. Let me just say, there is no such thing as free trade because every market is regulated. Whoever thought that? Anyhow, the role of the state is to create and preserve an institutional framework to protect the above. And state intervention on markets is valued to protect capital, but not public services. I am not making this up. That is what neoliberalism is. And I think what's very important and how it has entered Irish public life is neoliberalism is not just an explanatory model, it is a normative model. It is a moral framework as to how we should live. And it is not about solidarity or care of the stranger. It is about self-interest and care of yourself. And I think that is very problematic if it becomes uncontested. Let me just show you, in case people think it hasn't come. I just, last year, a few months ago, looked at how many government departments have the use of the term customer. A customer is somebody who buys something on the free market, should they want it or not. They are... I did find the Department of Education has a customer charter. You can't have a customer. A student doesn't buy shoes in education. They come to be enabled, to be nurtured, to be cared for, developed as human beings and in the particular subject or field that you teach. I don't say this to please you or because you have teachers, because I've said it elsewhere. The Department of Social Protection, 2,200 references to customers. How could you be a customer in the Department of Social Protection? You need protection. You don't go and buy it. Equally, the funniest one is the Revenue Commissioners, because I think that there are 1,562 references to customers in the Revenue Commissioners' website. As we know, if you don't pay your tax, you'll find out who or whether or not you are a customer. So I want to say here, though, is about our change in nomenclature. People say, don't be petty. A change in nomenclature doesn't matter. Language does not just name the world. It defines it in its meaning and it has consequences. And that, I think, is very important. If you look at the change in job seeker, there was a thing called unemployment assistance. What that recognised, an unemployment benefit, was that you could become unemployed, that you could be vulnerable. And I know many people, because I work quite a lot with the prisons, who will never work. Not because they mightn't like to, because nobody would ever hire them. They have too many mental health and addiction issues. But that dependency was not demonised. When you call somebody a job seeker, what you're saying to them as a citizen is, you're only of value in this society if you're looking for a job. And I think that is very serious, because dependency, none of us here would be alive this day or not we cared for in the dependency of our infancy. If we live long enough to be very old, we will be cared for and become disabled. And all of that, dependency is part of the continuum of life. It is not an aberration. So what I'm saying, I better hurry on. Sorry, I just want to say before I finish, there are winners, and here is where my challenge comes to you. Because we'll always think it's somebody else's problem. It's never us. But there are winners and there are losers. And certainly the study I've done on higher education is very clear that many people benefit greatly from the emergence of market capitalism within the higher education sector. They develop more funding, careers, they become stars, etc., etc. But that is a danger. And indeed, your own security is a danger. And I'd be the first to say teachers must be secure. I think it's wonderful to be here, to see the teacher unions meeting all around the country. I think it's a wonderful thing for democracy to have them. But remember, with security comes a risk that we become complacent in our class position, that we become indifferent to the outsider because we don't socialise with them, we don't meet them, maybe in the classroom, but you don't meet them as equal. You don't meet travellers generally as equal. Just to say this, because I think it might be forgotten, I look around the room and I've got my distance glasses on, but I don't see any black people here today. If there are travellers here, I doubt if they will come out and be identified. That is my experience. So let us look at ourselves and look at our own inside, and are we winners or are we losers in education? And what I'm saying here is habitual conceptualizations of when we start to talk about, our outcomes and, deliverables and KPIs and performance indicators, all that language. They are not incidental. They internalize and they become part of who we are. And we start to measure and see people through product eyes. Will they be good for our school? Will they be bad? Will they reduce the status? What will they do? And that is how we kind of begin to construe people. And it leads to a devaluation of people and what I would call carelessness. And just to finish up, because I better hurry up, I won't quote these here. What I'm saying is the trickle-down effect of increasingly measured market-led education is creating new ideal-type citizens and organisations. A focus on market efficiency overrides and weakens other values. First-order and moral principles, such as care for the other, collegiality, become second-order. Trust, collegiality, compassion are subordinated to regulation, control and competition. And what I suppose is even more serious is the glorification of competition. Competition is a part of life, but it is not a virtue. It means that the amoral has become the necessitous. We must be competitive. We must do this. And so that we mediate education through business models, and it legitimates the pursuit of self-interest by ourselves and indeed by the students, and to the detriment of care and concern. So I have argued just today, we need an ethic of care which would help to inform our thinking in education. While market-led models are transactional, they're calculative, they're about gain. Carer-led models are other-centred and they're about helping people as a priority value. And care has a different logic. Very important to remember. I'm not a great fan of, I won't go into the details of all the, what they call well-being. I think it's too individualised. I think we need to create caring institutions. Care has a different temporal logic. It cannot be done in measurable time. Nurturing needs dictate the time frames, not policy objectives. Care work is not infinitely condensable. You can't do it in less and less time. And we see that particularly the care of our elderly, where we now have 15-minute slots and 20-minute slots. It's so grossly abusive, in my view, of what it is to care. So what we get, if we have time-defined care, is you get pre-packaged units of supervision. That is what you get, to make sure you don't fall out of the bed or whatever it is. And I'm saying the rationality of caring is different from others, and it contradicts scientific and bureaucratic rationality. There's no career structure, there's no hierarchy, and it cannot be supplied to order. There's no beginning, middle or end. And I'm only asking today, I suppose, that we need to challenge the language and practices of neoliberalism as they are encoding capitalist values in education that are anti-equality, anti-care and anti-educational. And I think that teachers, you are an enormous body of people. You have huge intellectual power. Collectively, there's about 40,000 teachers in Ireland. I call on you to have your voice heard, to become not just in your own professional interest, because as I said, there is always a danger in getting wrapped up in that. You need to move beyond those and to become a voice for alternative values of care, equality and justice in education. Thank you very much.